Imagine living in a place where injustice seems to be in control, evil grows without limits, and prayers appear to go unanswered. This was the environment in which Habakkuk lived, a courageous and unique prophet. He not only saw the chaos around him, but also had the boldness to do something many avoid: question God. While other prophets simply shared divine messages, Habakkuk began his mission with difficult and sincere questions. Why, God? How long will this continue? He cried out from the depths of his soul as he witnessed corruption consuming the people and evil prevailing. Habakkuk wanted to understand what God's purpose was amidst so much suffering and apparent silence. What makes this story so remarkable is that during his search for answers, Habakkuk learned something incredible. Having faith does not mean knowing everything but trusting in God, who does. His journey, filled with doubts, suffering, and ultimately firm trust, is not just an ancient episode. It is an invitation to all who have ever wondered where God is during difficult times. Habakkuk was a unique prophet. While many simply delivered God's message to the people, he began his mission with questions instead of answers. He lived in Judah during a period of great injustice and disorder. The rich and powerful exploited the poor, corruption consumed everything, and it seemed that God remained silent in the face of the suffering of the righteous. Evil thrived without limits, and those who sought to do what was right ended up being overcome by difficulties or by the wicked. Habakkuk lived in very difficult times, surrounded by violence, betrayal, and a people who were increasingly drifting away from God. He could not understand why God allowed so many bad things to happen. Amid pain and confusion, Habakkuk took a bold step. He spoke directly to God, but his questions were not mere complaints. They were sincere prayers, full of anguish and a desire to understand. "How long, Lord?" he cried with a heavy heart. Habakkuk wanted to understand why evil always seemed to prevail and why good was ignored. With tears and prayers, he asked, "Why don't you do anything? How long will I cry out, 'Violence,' and you will not save?" Habakkuk chapter 1, verse 2. He sought answers, trying to make sense of so much suffering and God's apparent silence. Now imagine yourself in Habakkuk's place. Think about the courage it took for him to open his heart to God, sharing his doubts, pains, and frustrations. He was not challenging God, but trying to understand. Habakkuk knew that God was just and powerful, but his faith was being tested, and he needed answers to make sense of everything that was happening. What makes Habakkuk special is that he did not accept what he saw without questioning. He wanted to know more about God's heart and understand his plans. Instead of abandoning his faith, he chose to draw even closer to God, bringing his anguish and questions to the one who could truly respond. This was the beginning of a journey that not only transformed Habakkuk, but also teaches us how to deal with our doubts and difficult moments. And then God responded to Habakkuk's sincere cry, but the answer was not what he expected. In fact, it was so surprising that it brought even more questions to his heart. God showed Habakkuk that he was acting, even when it seemed he was silent. He assured him that his justice had not been forgotten and revealed that he was preparing something grand. God said, "I am sending the Chaldeans, a cruel and ruthless nation which invades lands and takes houses that are not theirs." Habakkuk chapter 1, verse 6. This answer surprised and shocked Habakkuk. The Chaldeans, also known as the Babylonians, were famous for their strength and cruelty. They were a powerful and feared people. Their army was like a devastating storm, destroying everything in its path. The Babylonians conquered territories with violence and pride, showing no respect for other nations or gods. For Habakkuk, it was difficult to understand how God could use such a cruel people to bring judgment upon Judah. This seemed contradictory, and the prophet found himself even more confused by God's plans. Imagine Habakkuk's confusion. He asked God for justice to correct the evil in Judah, but he never imagined it would happen through an even more cruel nation. It was as if God were saying, "Yes, I see the corruption in Judah and I will act, but I will use the Babylonians as instruments of my judgment." Habakkuk was left bewildered. How could such a holy and just God use such a wicked people to correct another? He knew Judah needed to be disciplined, but the idea that this would happen through the Babylonians seemed to go against everything he understood about God's character. Filled with doubts, Habakkuk questioned again, "You are so pure that you cannot tolerate evil, nor accept injustice. So why do you allow the treacherous to prosper and remain silent, while the wicked destroy those who are more righteous than they?" Habakkuk chapter 1 verse 13. Imagine how Habakkuk felt. It was as if he had asked for rain to relieve the drought, but received a devastating storm. He wanted God to act, but never thought the Babylonians would be part of that plan. Habakkuk was not rejecting God. He simply wanted to understand his ways, which are often beyond our comprehension. This situation teaches us a valuable lesson. God's answers are not always what we expect or desire. Habakkuk learned that God's plans are greater and more complex than we can understand. Even when they seem difficult, we can trust that He has a perfect purpose in everything He does. Despite having so many doubts, Habakkuk did not give up. He continued seeking to understand God's plans. He knew that God is just and that in the end, everything would turn out well. This was a pivotal moment in his journey because he realized that having faith does not always mean having easy answers, but trusting God, even when we do not understand what is happening. Habakkuk, still filled with doubts, decided to keep seeking answers. He symbolically climbed a watchtower, a place of waiting and reflection, where he prepared himself to hear what God had to say. He was determined to understand the divine plan, even if it was difficult to accept. Once again, Habakkuk cried out to God. He acknowledged that God is eternal, holy, and sovereign, but still struggled to understand how these truths applied to what was happening around him. He wanted clearer answers, and God, in His goodness, spoke again, bringing an even deeper message. God began by reaffirming that He is in control of everything. Even though the Babylonians seemed invincible and feared, they were not beyond His authority. God explained that He would use the Babylonians to correct Judah, but assured Habakkuk that their wickedness and pride would also be judged. He reminded Habakkuk that His justice never fails, even if to us it seems delayed. God said something that became one of the most important messages in the Bible. The righteous will live by their faith. Habakkuk chapter 2 verse 4. This phrase, simple yet full of meaning, showed Habakkuk that in times of difficulty it is not power, wealth, or strength that sustains a person. What truly keeps someone steadfast, even in the hardest situations, is faith, trusting completely in God and His plans. Imagine how this message touched Habakkuk's heart. He lived in a world where everything seemed out of control. Injustice dominated Judah, and the Babylonians were on their way, bringing destruction. Even so, God asked Habakkuk to see beyond the chaos around him. He said, "Trust me. I know what I'm doing. My justice will come at the right time, and those who trust in me will have life, even in the midst of storms." God also spoke to Habakkuk about the future judgment of the Babylonians, condemning their greed, violence, idolatry, and arrogance. He made it clear that He does not ignore evil. God sees everything and acts at the right time. For Habakkuk, this was an important reminder that God is sovereign not only over Judah but over all nations. This was a turning point for Habakkuk. He understood that having faith is not about having all the answers, but about trusting who God is, even without comprehending all the details of His plans. Habakkuk realized that God is never distant or indifferent. On the contrary, he is always acting, even in the most difficult and confusing moments. The phrase, "the righteous will live by faith," became an essential truth, not only for Habakkuk, but for the entire Bible. The Apostle Paul quotes this message in Romans chapter 1, verse 17, Galatians chapter 3, verse 11, and Hebrews chapter 10, verse 38, emphasizing that it is the foundation of the Christian life. Faith is what brings us closer to God, strengthens us, and gives us hope even in the darkest times. With this revelation, Habakkuk began to see everything differently. He realized that even when a situation seems unsolvable, trusting God is what truly sustains him. The prophet was learning to move from confusion to worship, and this lesson of faith became the foundation for the song of praise he composed at the end. This teaches us something powerful. The righteous do not live depending on what happens around them or on human logic, but fully trust in God, who never fails. In chapter 3 of Habakkuk, we see a prayer that goes far beyond a cry for help. It is a song filled with reverence, trust, and total surrender to God. At this moment, Habakkuk demonstrates what it means to have true faith, even in the face of the worst difficulties. Habakkuk begins by recalling the great deeds of God in the past. He recognizes that the same God who parted the Red Sea, made Mount Sinai tremble, and defeated enemies to protect his people is still in control of everything. The prophet uses powerful imagery to describe God's might. Lightning comes from his hands, mountains tremble before him, and the earth reflects his glory. It is an awe-inspiring vision that displays God's absolute power over all creation. Lord, I have heard of your works and I am in awe. Do them again, Lord, in our time, and even in your wrath, remember your mercy. Habakkuk chapter 3, verse 2. With these words, Habakkuk asks God to show his power and mercy once again, even in difficult times. He understands that God is just, but also full of compassion, and that in the end, God's goodness always prevails. What makes this chapter so remarkable is Habakkuk's transformation. He moves from recalling God's deeds in the past to accepting what is happening in the present. He sees the calamity that is coming, the Babylonian invasion, Judah's destruction, and the suffering of the people. Habakkuk does not pretend that everything will improve immediately. Instead, he faces reality with courage and makes an extraordinary declaration. Even though the fig tree does not bear fruit, the vines have no grapes, the olive tree produces nothing, the fields remain empty, the sheep disappear, and there is no cattle in the stalls. Yet I will rejoice in the Lord and praise the God who saves me. Habakkuk chapter 3, verses 17 and 18. These words show a faith that goes beyond circumstances. Habakkuk understands that the harvest may fail, the flocks may vanish, and life may be very hard. But he does not base his joy on material things, security, or comfort. His joy is in God, in the assurance that he is the Savior and the true source of hope. Habakkuk ends his prayer with a declaration of strength and confidence. The sovereign Lord is my strength. He makes my feet like those of a deer. He enables me to tread on the heights. Habakkuk chapter 3, verse 19. Now imagine this scene. Habakkuk, who began filled with doubts and anguish, ends with confidence, like a deer climbing mountains with lightness and security. He has learned to trust completely in God, even when the path seems difficult and uncertain. Habakkuk does not understand every detail of God's plan, but he knows that he is sovereign, faithful, and worthy of all praise. This prayer is more than the climax of Habakkuk's story. It is a timeless model of faith and hope for all of us. Habakkuk teaches us that even in the most challenging moments, when everything seems without solution, we can look back and remember God's power in the past. He is the same God who parted seas, tore down walls, and fed his people in the wilderness. This remembrance strengthens our trust, reminding us that God has always been faithful and has never failed to fulfill his promises. Habakkuk also challenges us to trust God in the present, even when circumstances do not make sense. It is natural to want immediate answers or quick solutions, but Habakkuk's story shows us that true faith goes beyond that. It is not based on what we can see or understand, but on who God is, sovereign, just, and loving. This trust in God's character gives us the strength to face any challenge, knowing that He is in control. Furthermore, Habakkuk inspires us to wait joyfully for the future. He reminds us that God acts at the right time and that even when it seems delayed, His justice and goodness will prevail. This certainty allows us to have hope amidst chaos, knowing that the story does not end with suffering. God always has a greater plan, and in the end, His glory will be revealed. Habakkuk's attitude teaches us a powerful lesson: to cultivate a faith that says, even though, instead of if. Even though the harvests fail, the flocks disappear, and life is full of challenges, we can choose to rejoice in God. This faith does not depend on favorable circumstances, but on a deep and unshakable relationship with the Creator. It is a faith that does not seek external guarantees, but finds strength in the certainty that God is our fortress. Habakkuk shows us how it is possible to transform pain into praise and doubt into trust. He ends his prayer with a declaration of strength and victory. "The sovereign Lord is my strength." This phrase sums up a journey of faith that faced difficult questions but found answers in God's presence. It invites us to do the same, to trust, to persevere, and to rejoice in the Lord, even when everything around us seems to fall apart. After all, true strength comes from God, and it is in Him that we find the reason to move forward, regardless of circumstances. Write in the comments if you already knew Habakkuk's story. Don't forget to leave your like, share this message with others, and subscribe to the channel to follow the upcoming videos. May God bless your life.